Most people live their entire lives believing reality is happening to them, but the rare few, the 1%, discover something unsettling. Reality is not happening to them. It's happening because of them. And the moment you understand this, truly understand it, something irreversible begins. The world doesn't look the same, it doesn't respond the same, and neither do you. Because buried underneath your ordinary life, woven through every moment you call real, is a quantum mechanism so simple, so obvious once you see it, that it feels strange that you ever missed it. This is the quantum law of being, and you're about to understand what only a fraction of people ever do. Imagine, just for a moment, that everything you think of as the world is a kind of mirror. Not a metaphorical mirror, but a literal one made of light, energy, probability, and resonance. A mirror that reflects not your face, not your behavior, not even your actions, but your state, your inner tone, your identity level frequency, the invisible signature of who you believe yourself to be. Most people don't know this mirror exists. They look outward and assume they're seeing a physical world governed by physical laws unfolding independently, a world that doesn't bend or shift unless something forces it to. That's the oldest story humanity ever believed, a story built into school books, science classes, culture, and language, a story that says you are here, reality is there, and the two are separate. But what if that story has been wrong for centuries? What if the universe is not a stage you walk through, but a field that reshapes itself around the way you walk? What if the world is responding to you more faithfully than you respond to yourself? Quantum physics has quietly been dismantling the old worldview. The more deeply scientists examine reality, the more the universe behaves like a mirror rather than a machine. Particles don't exist as solid objects until they are observed. Possibilities remain possibilities until attention selects one. The observer is not a passive witness. The observer is the activator. But this is not new. Ancient metaphysics taught this long before the language of quantum mechanics existed. Hermeticists said, as within, so without, as above, so below. They weren't describing poetry, they were describing a mechanism you are using every single day, mostly without knowing it. And the truth is this: you are not in the universe looking around. You are the universe looking at itself from a specific angle, through a specific identity, in a specific moment of time. And the field responds to the identity you occupy, not the identity you wish for, not the identity you talk about, not the identity you hope to attract, only the identity you are being. Because being is not an action. Being is the tone that instructs the mirror. So the question becomes, where does the tone of your being come from? It comes from the assumptions you hold about yourself, from the stories you tell in silence, from the subtle emotional signature that follows you everywhere you go. A man who believes he is unlucky doesn't simply experience bad outcomes. He tunes his consciousness to the timeline where those outcomes exist. A woman who believes she is invisible doesn't simply get ignored. She broadcasts a frequency that aligns her with realities where she cannot be seen. A person who believes life is hard finds themselves on the timeline where it must be hard, because the mirror cannot defy the signal. It has no will of its own. It does not choose what to show you. It does not negotiate or compromise. It only reflects. This is the part people resist, because it means reality is not random and it is not cruel. It means something far more confronting. Reality is obedient. And sometimes it is obedient to states you've forgotten you're carrying. Picture yourself standing before a vast, infinite mirror made not of glass but of vibrating potential. Every possible version of your life shines behind its surface. The successful you, the healed you, the free you, the confident you, the abundant you, that deeply loved you. The mirror contains them all, but it will only reveal the one you match. This is the quantum law of being. You do not get the life you want. You get the life that reflects who you are being, and that is why only 1% of people ever understand it, because this law removes every excuse, every illusion of powerlessness, every comforting belief that the world is something out there happening on its own. When you see that the universe is responsive rather than static, reflective rather than independent, intimate rather than distant, you can no longer live as the version of you who believes circumstances hold the power. Once you understand that you shape the mirror by your internal state, you cannot go back to thinking reality is fixed, because it isn't. It never has been. This movement is only the threshold, a doorway into the deeper architecture of your existence. Ahead lies a truth even more extraordinary. You are not influencing the universe from afar. You are woven into its fabric. You are its awareness, folded into human form, and the field responds to itself, which means the shift you seek doesn't begin in the world, it begins in the quiet, private space where your state is chosen, often unconsciously, often on autopilot. But now you are about to step out of the old story. You are about to understand the mechanism behind every timeline shift you've ever felt, but never named. You are about to see the quantum mirror for what it is, and more importantly, for what it has always been reflecting back to you. You move through life assuming you are navigating a solid, external world, a world that exists independently of your inner life, governed solely by physical forces and external circumstances. You believe you are stepping into a reality that is already formed, already decided, already arranged without your input. Yet the deeper you look into the nature of existence, the more that assumption begins to dissolve, because the world does not behave like a static structure. It behaves like a mirror, not a poetic mirror, not a symbolic mirror, but an energetic one, alive, responsive, relational. A mirror that reflects not your gestures, not your personality, not the surface of your emotions, but the state of consciousness you consistently embody. Your reality is not reacting to what you occasionally think or momentarily feel. It is reflecting the identity-level frequency you live inside day after day. This is why the gap between what people want and what they experience can be so vast. Someone can want abundance while living in the internal state of lack. They can desire love while holding the emotional posture of someone who feels unworthy or unseen. They can crave freedom while embodying the state of limitation. They can set goals, write affirmations, visualize success, repeat mantras, but if the underlying state remains the same, their timeline remains the same. The world mirrors being, not wishing. It reflects coherence, not effort. It reorganizes itself around the tone you radiate, not the fantasies you briefly entertain. And because this mechanism is precise, reality becomes predictable once you understand it. Whatever you hold as true of yourself becomes true in your world. This is why thoughts alone don't create reality. Thoughts are temporary, fleeting, inconsistent. The field doesn't respond to the mind's noise. It responds to the emotional truth beneath the mind, the self-concept, the assumption, the inner posture. You can tell yourself, I am confident, but if your state is tuned to self-doubt, the mirror will show you situations that reinforce insecurity. You can affirm, I am chosen, but if your state is that of someone who expects rejection, life will reflect circumstances that confirm that expectation. The mirror is not judging you, it is not punishing you, it is not withholding anything. It simply reflects the version of you you've been being, quietly, consistently, often unconsciously. To understand how this works, consider a subtle example. Think of a time in your life when things felt heavy or constricted. Maybe you woke up feeling overwhelmed, or you carried a sense of unworthiness without naming it. On days like that, the world seems to cooperate with the heaviness. Delays happen, small frustrations build, opportunities appear invisible, people respond in ways that echo your internal state. You might interpret these moments as external challenges, but they're actually reflections. The field is translating your inner atmosphere into outer events, not to punish you, but because that is the only function a mirror has, to reveal what is placed before it. Now consider the opposite, times when you felt open, grounded, aligned. On those days, life feels smoother. You find clarity without forcing it. Interactions flow, solutions appear. You notice possibilities you previously overlooked. You might call it luck or synchronicity, but it's simply resonance. The mirror is reflecting the coherence of your internal state. You are seeing the world through the identity of someone who can navigate it with ease, and the world responds accordingly. None of this is random. None of it is coincidental. The mirror is always reflecting your state because your state is the instruction to reality. As within, so without was never metaphorical. It was the most literal description of the mechanics of consciousness. The law is simple. You cannot see a reality you are not the vibration of. You cannot perceive opportunities belonging to a self you are not inhabiting. You cannot tune into a timeline that contradicts the frequency you emit. And this is where the shift begins, when you realize that reality is not something you look at. It is something you look through. Your inner state acts like a lens, shaping what you notice, how you interpret events, and, ultimately, what timeline you walk into. Two people can stand in the same room and live two entirely different realities, depending on the state they bring into it. One might see obstacles, the other sees openings. One feels threatened, the other feels supported. One sees scarcity, the other sees abundance. The environment is the same. The mirror is unchanged, but the reflection differs because the observer differs. This is also why people can live years of their lives without recognizing the opportunities that surround them. If someone is living in the emotional state of, "I am stuck," the mirror faithfully reflects a world where options appear limited. Possibilities hide in plain sight, not because they aren't there, but because the state of "I am stuck" cannot perceive them. The timeline containing freedom is already present, but invisible to the identity that doesn't match it. In the same way, when someone shifts into the state of "I am capable," "I am worthy," or "I am ready," the world doesn't suddenly generate new opportunities. The person simply becomes able to see what was always around them. This is the essence of reality as a mirror. The world does not respond first, you do. You shift internally, and the external dimension follows. You change state, and your perception reorganizes. You release an old emotional signature, and the timeline that depended on that signature dissolves. You adopt a new identity, and a new reflection appears, not instantly in form, but instantly in structure. You can feel it long before you can see it. That moment, when something inside you opens, expands, lifts, is not your imagination. It is the field beginning to translate a new state into a new world. And now, with this understanding, you stand at the threshold of an even deeper revelation. If reality mirrors your state, then the timeline you occupy is not chosen for you. It's chosen by you. And the power to choose a new one has always been within your being. In the next movement, you will see how identity becomes the selector of timelines and how the quantum field responds the moment you choose a new version of yourself to inhabit. The more deeply you understand the nature of consciousness, the more you begin to sense that your life is not unfolding along a single linear track. Instead, it exists within a vast field of parallel possibilities, a luminous spectrum of timelines where every version of you already lives. In the higher dimension, nothing is waiting to be created. Everything already exists in a state of potential, shimmering like threads of light stretching in every direction. Each thread represents a different expression of your life, the version of you who stepped into confidence, the version of you who healed, the version of you who trusted themselves, the version who chose differently, the version who expanded beyond fear, the version who lives with ease, grace, clarity, abundance, and alignment. These possibilities are not imaginary. They are structural. They coexist simultaneously, and you navigate among them not by force or effort, but by identity. You shift timelines when you shift who you are being. Imagine standing in the center of this infinite field, your consciousness like a tuning fork sending out a frequency. All the timelines vibrate at their own unique resonance. The timeline of limitation has its tone. The timeline of abundance has its tone. The timeline of emotional freedom, of intuitive strength, of personal power, of deep love, they each vibrate with their own signature. You do not choose these timelines with thought alone. You do not choose them by hoping, wishing, imagining, or repeating words. You choose them by embodying the emotional resonance of the version of you who already lives there. Identity is the selector. Your state of being is the tuning mechanism, and the timeline that matches your frequency is the one that becomes your lived experience. And this is why people often feel as if they are repeating the same year over and over again. They are not trapped by circumstances. They are anchored to a state. They wake each morning as the same version of themselves, carrying the same emotional signature, broadcasting the same internal tone. And because the signal doesn't change, the timeline doesn't either. Someone living in the state of "I am overwhelmed" will naturally step into timelines where overwhelm repeats itself. Someone living in the state of "I am not enough" will find themselves on timelines where they are overlooked or undervalued. Someone inhabiting the state of "life is against me" will walk into experiences that reinforce that belief. The world feels repetitive not because timelines are limited, but because identity has stayed the same. And yet the opposite is equally true. When you shift your identity even slightly, when you change the way you hold yourself internally, everything begins to reorganize. You may not see the new timeline immediately, but you will feel its presence. You'll notice new ideas arriving that weren't available to the old version of you. You'll begin perceiving options that were invisible before. You'll feel drawn to different choices, different people, different behaviors, different environments, not because you're forcing change, but because you are no longer the self who belongs to the old timeline. The moment you shift identity, the field responds. The threads of possibility begin rearranging themselves in your direction. And the reality that once seemed distant, unlikely, or out of reach suddenly feels closer, more accessible, more natural, because the version of you who lives there has awakened within you. You've experienced glimpses of this before, moments when you suddenly clicked into a new level of clarity, when something inside you felt upgraded. Perhaps it happened after a moment of strong decision, or after a deep realization, or after a period of letting go. Perhaps it happened quietly in a moment of calm when you realized you could no longer return to the old way of being. That subtle shift was a timeline shift. You didn't think your way into it, you became your way into it. And the field recognized the new identity instantly. The quantum field responds not to your desires, but to the version of you who desires them. When the identity changes, the timeline must change too. This is why the law of selection is so powerful. It removes the illusion that you must chase outcomes. It dissolves the belief that you must persuade the universe. It reveals that you are already surrounded by infinite versions of your life, and the only question is, which version of yourself are you aligning with right now? Your assumptions about yourself become the doors you open. Your emotional tone becomes the compass, guiding you through the multidimensional landscape of possibilities. Your self-concept becomes the gravitational force that pulls certain timelines into your lived reality. You are not manifesting a future, you are tuning yourself to the version of you who is already living it. This is not philosophy, this is mechanics. Identity selects, identity interprets, identity perceives. And perception is the first sign of a new timeline unfolding. When you shift your identity from I am powerless to I am capable, the world does not suddenly change, but your perception of the world does. You begin noticing the signs, the openings, the alignments, the opportunities that match the new identity. This is why timeline shifts often begin with subtle changes, a new idea, a new sense of possibility, a new emotional baseline, a new clarity. These are not random, they are the early indicators that the timeline ahead of you has changed its trajectory and is now opening in response to your new state. And as this awareness deepens, you begin to see the truth that sits at the heart of this movement. You are never waiting for a timeline. The timeline is always waiting for you, waiting for your coherence, waiting for your alignment, waiting for your identity to match the version of reality you wish to inhabit. Once that happens, the shift is inevitable. The field begins to translate your new being into new experience. The mirror begins to reveal a new reflection, and reality begins to reorganize around the version of you who has chosen themselves at a deeper level. This movement prepares you for what comes next, the moment when the internal shift becomes so real, so embodied, so coherent that the external world must follow it. This is the threshold where timelines collapse into form, where identity becomes destiny, and where the quantum law of being reveals its full power. In the next movement, you will see how this shift becomes visible, undeniable, and irreversible as reality begins to echo the new self you have stepped into. As you begin to understand the architecture of timelines, a deeper realization emerges, one that changes everything. Timelines are not selected through thought alone, nor through desire, nor through effort, nor through the strategies and routines people cling to when they want their life to shift. The field does not respond to what you hope for, it responds to what you are. And what you are is not defined by what you say, what you post, what you plan, or what you wish for, but by the state of being you wake up inside every day without noticing. State is the hidden mechanism behind the quantum law of being. It is the emotional climate you live in, the inner stance you carry, the identity level frequency you radiate without trying. It is so automatic you rarely ever question it, yet it shapes your reality more faithfully than anything you consciously do. This is why so many people feel stuck even when they are trying everything. They visualize, they set goals, they take action, they repeat affirmations, but they are doing all of this from within the same old state. They are hoping for abundance while living in the state of someone who doesn't believe abundance is possible for them. They are longing for a loving relationship while inhabiting the state of someone who fears abandonment. They are working hard to elevate their life while silently agreeing with the identity of someone not quite good enough. They are trying to manifest new outcomes while being inwardly aligned with old conclusions. And the field, neutral, precise, obedient, reflects the state, not the desire. This is why change feels so slow. Not because the universe is resisting you, but because the universe cannot reveal a timeline that contradicts the state you are being. State is not a mood. It is not a fleeting emotion. It is the deeper baseline identity from which those emotions arise. You can feel joyful for a moment while living in the state of lack. You can feel grateful for an hour while living in the state of fear. You can speak words of confidence while being the identity of someone who doubts themselves. But the field doesn't respond to these temporary spikes. It responds to what is consistent. And what is consistent is the state you always come home to, that familiar tone running beneath your thoughts like an emotional hum. If you pay attention, you'll notice it. A subtle heaviness, a quiet anxiety, a constant vigilance, a sense of waiting, a suspicion that things don't work out, or, for those who have already begun shifting, a growing softness, a peace, a quiet knowing that life is supporting them. That is your true frequency. That is the selector. People often remain in unwanted states simply because they are familiar. You can live in the state of "I'm overwhelmed" for so many years that it becomes your emotional home, and the world mirrors situations that keep you overwhelmed. You can live in the state of "I'm always overlooked" and attract experiences where your presence is dismissed, not because the world dislikes you, but because the field is following your internal signature. You can live in the state of "life is hard for me" and reliably find timelines where obstacles appear repeatedly. This is not punishment. This is precision. The mirror is reflecting the emotional truth you hold about yourself, the truth you may not say out loud, but live inside every day. But the opposite is equally true. When someone shifts their state, even in small, subtle ways, the world rearranges with astonishing consistency. Imagine a person living for years in the state of "I'm stuck." They walk past opportunities without noticing them. They decline invitations that could open new paths. They ignore resources within reach. Their world seems narrow and unchanging, not because there are no possibilities, but because the state of "I'm stuck" cannot perceive them. Then imagine this same person beginning to feel differently, not because their circumstances changed, but because they changed. Perhaps they feel a spark of curiosity, a sense of readiness, a whisper of possibility, a quiet shift in self-perception. Suddenly the world doesn't appear as closed as before. They start noticing options. Their mind becomes more flexible. People treat them differently, not because the world suddenly improved, but because they moved into a state that corresponds to a freer timeline. The outer world becomes visible to the version of them who can receive it. This is how state works. It doesn't just change what you attract, it changes what you perceive, what you choose, what you interpret, what you allow. The state of "I am worthy" sees opportunities everywhere. The state of "I am safe" sees solutions instead of danger. The state of "I am chosen" recognizes the pathways opening for it. The state of "I am powerful" experiences the world as something responsive rather than hostile. And when your perception shifts, the timeline you stand on shifts with it. You enter the reality that belongs to the identity you've stepped into. This is why identity work is the most profound work you will ever do. You can change habits, routines, environments, relationships, career paths, but if your state remains the same, life will eventually snap back to match it. The field is too faithful to do anything else. It always reflects the self you've agreed to be. But the moment you shift that self, reality obeys, not gradually, immediately. What feels gradual is not the shift itself, but your linear experience of watching the shift unfold through time. The universe does not resist your new state. It accommodates it. It reorganizes around it. It follows it. because the universe is not separate from you. It is your state expressed through form. When you grasp this mechanism, something profound awakens. You stop trying to manipulate circumstances and begin changing the internal identity that circumstances arise from. You stop fighting your life and begin tuning yourself to the version of life you want to live. You stop asking why things aren't changing and start asking a more powerful question. Who am I being that the universe must reflect this back to me? And from that moment onward, the shift becomes inevitable, because you no longer live as a reactor to reality, you live as the source of it. And once you understand yourself as the source, the timeline that once felt out of reach begins to move toward you. And then before you know it, an internal shift becomes undeniable. It rarely begins with fireworks or dramatic revelations. It begins with something softer, a new thought that feels strangely believable, a feeling of possibility that doesn't collapse under old fears, a sense of inner spaciousness that wasn't there before. You may not even realize what's happening, because the moment you shift state rarely feels like a transformation. It feels like relief. It feels like the closing of an old chapter you didn't know you were still reading. It feels like remembering a truth that had been whispering beneath the noise of your life for years. And yet within this quiet moment, the architecture of your entire timeline begins to change. You move from the vibrational signature of your old identity into the frequency of a new one, and the universe, obedient, precise, responsive, starts rearranging the world around you. This is the moment where the quantum law of being becomes visible. Not because reality immediately reshapes itself into your dream life, but because the internal lock that held you in a certain timeline dissolves. Suddenly you don't feel stuck the way you did before. Suddenly you're not rehearsing the same old emotional scripts. Suddenly your reactions are different, your assumptions are different. Your expectations soften, the inner walls loosen, the emotional gravity that pulled you into the same experiences again and again begins to break. And reality feels lighter, not because the world has changed, but because the version of you perceiving it has. What once felt fixed now feels permeable. What once felt heavy now feels open. What once felt impossible now feels plausible. This is the first evidence of a new timeline beginning to reveal itself. It begins inside you long before the world catches up. Think of the last time you experienced a moment of sudden clarity, when a solution seemed to appear out of nowhere, when you realized you weren't who you used to be, when you felt a shift in your priorities and your perception. That was not random, that was your state changing, which means your timeline changed. You became incompatible with the version of reality you once lived in. This is why when people undergo deep identity shifts, they often lose interest in old habits, old relationships, old conversations, old environments. It's not because they're trying to, it's because their new state no longer aligns with those old timelines. Their consciousness has moved on, and the world must follow. This is the moment where the mirror starts to reflect a different version of you, one that is aligned with the identity you are now inhabiting. Here's the part most people overlook. The world will always adjust itself to match the state you hold consistently, not instantly. If you shift into the state of freedom, you may still walk into the same job tomorrow. If you shift into the state of abundance, your bank account may look unchanged for a while. If you shift into the state of confidence, your external life may appear identical the next day, but something fundamental has already changed. The timeline you are on is different. The outcomes ahead of you are different. The opportunities you will encounter are different. The version of you who meets those opportunities is different. You can feel it in the small things first. The openness, the brightness, the clarity, the subtle alignment. These are the early signs of reality rearranging itself. Not because you forced it to, but because you became someone who belongs to a different reflection. This is why people sometimes describe a sudden sense of things beginning to happen. Meetings flow naturally, ideas come effortlessly. Conversations lead somewhere unexpected, new people appear, old problems dissolve, the universe seems to cooperate. What they're really experiencing is coherence. When your inner frequency matches the timeline you want, you move through life differently, more intuitively, more confidently, more fluidly, more magnetically. And the world recognizes you, not as the person you used to be, but as the identity you are now embodying. Life reorganizes itself around this new signal. The events that unfold begin to feel like synchronicities, like signs, like support. But they're not miracles in the mystical sense. They are the inevitable consequences of entering a new state of being. This is the moment the old spell breaks, the spell that said you were separate from reality. The spell that convinced you the world was fixed and indifferent. The spell that made you believe you had to work endlessly to force life into shape. When you shift state, you recognize the illusion for what it was. You see that the world was never resisting you, it was reflecting you. You see that the timeline you lived on was never a prison, it was a match to your old identity. You see that the universe was always listening, always responding, always translating your internal posture into external form. And when you experience this directly, when you feel the world beginning to adjust, something irreversible happens. You stop living as a victim of circumstances and start becoming the author of them. You begin to trust the process, not because someone told you to, but because you can feel the shift within yourself. You notice old patterns losing power. You notice new opportunities appearing with stunning precision. You notice your emotions aligning with the version of you you've chosen to be. And you realize the truth. The timeline you want is already yours the moment you become the version of yourself who lives on it. The universe doesn't give you the new timeline. You step into it through identity. You become it through frequency, and reality responds. This is why some changes feel instantaneous, even though nothing in the outer world has moved yet. The shift is internal, and the internal shift is the real cause. The outer world is simply the echo. When you understand this, you stop waiting for signs and start recognizing them. You stop pushing and start aligning. You stop doubting and start expecting, because you know deeply, intimately, that the moment you change your state, your world must follow. Not instantly in form, but instantly in structure. The timeline begins to tilt, the path begins to open, the reflection begins to clarify, and life begins to move toward the version of you who is already waiting in the future. As we move into the final movement, you will step into the most profound realization of all. You are not influencing reality, you are generating it. You are not asking the universe to shift, you are shifting yourself, and the universe is responding to its own reflection. The mirror is not outside you, the mirror is you. Up until now, you've explored the mirror, the timelines, the states, the invisible architecture guiding your life from the inside out. But here, at the culmination, a greater truth emerges, one that the 1% understand instinctively once they cross this threshold. You are not influencing the quantum field from a distance. You are the quantum field localized as a human. Consciousness is not something you project outward. It is the fabric from which both you and reality are woven. There was never a separation, only the temporary illusion of one. When people speak about manifesting, shifting timelines, attracting outcomes, they often imagine a human mind sending signals to an external universe. They imagine themselves as a small being trying to sway, something vast, mysterious, cosmic, but the truth overturns that entire framework. You are not a tiny spark in an indifferent universe. You are the awareness through which the universe becomes conscious of itself. You are not a requester asking the field to respond. You are the field expressing itself through your nervous system, your self-concept, your identity, your state. The mirror is not reacting to you as if you are separate from it. The mirror is reflecting its own nature through the form you currently occupy. And this is why the law is perfect, unbroken, universal. The reflection always matches the source because the reflection is the source. When this realization dawns, not intellectually but somatically, perceptually, you begin to sense the quiet power that has always been breathing beneath your life. The idea of forcing outcomes dissolves, the urge to control timelines loosens, the belief that you must push your life into shape falls away, because you finally understand that the universe does not rearrange itself because you demand it. It rearranges itself because you have become someone new. It cannot reflect anything else. It cannot show you a world that contradicts your identity, because your identity is the field's point of expression. And so you start trusting the process, not because someone told you to, but because you recognize that the process is you. You start trusting the timing, not because you hope it will work out, but because the timing is the rhythm of your own expansion. You stop fearing uncertainty because uncertainty is simply the part of the timeline you haven't opened yet. And then something else happens, something subtle but unmistakable. You begin to feel the presence of the version of you who has already lived the timeline you want, not as a fantasy, not as a visualization, but as a frequency, a tone, a knowing. It is as if the future self you once imagined is now whispering through your present identity, guiding you toward the states that align with your highest expression. That sense of déjà vu when you take aligned action, that quiet certainty when you choose differently than before, that feeling of inevitability when something falls into place. That is not coincidence. That is coherence. That is you stepping onto the timeline where the future you already exists. And once this becomes real to you, the journey stops being about getting anything. It becomes about unveiling the version of you who already holds everything you once longed for. You realize that the abundance you desire is not waiting to arrive. It exists on a timeline that responds to the identity of someone who feels abundant now. The love you desire is not waiting in the future. It exists on a timeline that matches the state of someone who already feels deeply worthy and open. The freedom you seek is not something you chase. It's the natural expression of the version of you who no longer inhabits the state of limitation. The timelines do not withhold anything. They simply mirror the self you choose to be. Which brings you to the heart of this final movement. The law has never been about changing reality. It has always been about changing identity. Your state shifts, and the world responds. Your identity expands and your timeline expands. Your self-concept elevates, and life elevates with it. You are not manifesting, you are matching. You are not attracting. You are aligning. You are not persuading the universe. You are remembering how to speak the language of your own nature. The quantum law of being is not a technique. It is a truth, one that becomes obvious once you experience it directly. The world is your reflection because you and the world are the same field reorganized into different shapes. And so the final realization arrives. Quietly, gently, with the softness of something you've always known but never put into words. The mirror has never had any power of its own. It was never judging you, never limiting you, never denying you. It was waiting for you to shift state, waiting for you to choose who you are, waiting for you to step into the frequency of the life you are meant to live. The mirror does not lead, it follows. It cannot show you a new reality until you become the version of yourself who belongs to that reality. But the moment you do truly do, the reflection changes, because it must, because it has no choice, because reflection is the natural consequence of identity. And now you understand why only 1% ever fully grasp this, not because the law is complex, but because it is intimate. It requires you to see yourself as the source rather than the effect. It asks you to take responsibility for the frequency you live inside. It invites you to lead life from the inside out instead of waiting for external proof. But once you do, once you embrace the truth that your state shapes the mirror, you step into a level of agency that feels like magic, even though it is simply the physics of consciousness. You began this journey thinking you were looking into a mirror. Now you see that you were looking at yourself all along, and the field is waiting for your next signal, your next identity, your next state, your next choice.